What happens to the daughter of an empire when the world she knows is consumed by fire? On May 29, 1453, a 15-year-old Byzantine princess named Theodora was sealed within a palace that was about to become a slaughterhouse. Outside, the 80,000 soldiers of Sultan Mehmed II were tearing down the walls that had stood for 1,100 years. Inside, a terrified court awaited a fate written by Islamic law. 3 days of absolute unrestrained violence and enslavement. Theodora was a prize, the ultimate symbol of a defeated dynasty. For centuries, the story of Constantinople's fall has been told through the brutality of the conqueror. But what if the deepest cruelty of that day was not the savagery of the Sultan's army, but the uncomfortable, cold-blooded mercy of the Sultan himself? What if the true horror lies in the calculation of a ruler who saved a life not out of compassion, but out of a ruthless desire to claim a dead empire's soul? This is a story of a siege, a hidden identity, and a single decision in a blood-soaked throne room that historians have desperately tried to sanitize. The final spring of the oldest Christian empire was the spring of despair. Constantinople, the city-kingdom, the clay-knot, the invincible fortress, was an island of gold surrounded by a sea of Ottoman steel. For 55 days the city had endured a siege that felt like the end of time. 80,000 Ottoman warriors, over 200 ships, and a monstrous artillery train led by the Hungarian engineer Orban pounded the ancient Theodosian walls. The monster cannon alone was 27 feet long, firing 200-pound stone balls that turned the millennium-old defense into crumbling dust. Inside stood the last remnants of Rome, 7,000 exhausted defenders, Greeks, Italians, and Spaniards against impossible odds. The air was thick with the stench of gunpowder, burning tar, and a fear that transcended panic. Church bells rang ceaselessly. Priests paraded through the streets with holy icons, praying not for victory, but for a divine intervention that would never arrive. Every citizen knew the ancient law of a city taken by storm. 3 days of looting, capture, and terror. In the great palace, over the glimmering golden horn, was the last of the Palaiologos dynasty. Emperor Constantine Palaiologos, 48 years old, unmarried, childless, understood his fate. He would die defending his city. But his younger kin included the 15-year-old Princess Theodora Palaiologina. She was described in historical records as small and delicate, with dark Byzantine eyes, educated in Greek, Latin, and courtly arts. What she feared most was the fate of thousands of women taken as spoils of war. She desired only the impossible, that tomorrow might be like yesterday. Her survival would not be decided by Ottoman law, but by the complex, burning ambition of the man commanding the army outside. On the Ottoman side, Sultan Mehmed II was an obsession made flesh. At only 21, he had already ruled twice, been deposed, and returned to the throne with everything to prove. European courts mocked him as a brazen boy. His own janissaries doubted him. His legendary warrior father, Murad II, cast a long, unforgiving shadow. Mehmed was short, curly-haired, with an eagle's nose and intense dark eyes that observers described as possessing a burning ambition. He spoke 6 languages, including Greek and Latin. Crucially, he studied Alexander the Great obsessively, sleeping with a copy of Arrian's campaigns under his pillow. He did not just want to conquer Constantinople, he wanted to become the new Caesar, a ruler who would unite the East and the West under a single, unchallenged crown. His advisors, exhausted by the 55-day campaign, warned that his reign was on the line. The financial burden was crushing. The entire imperial project depended on breaking those walls. On May 28th, the day before the final, cataclysmic assault, Mehmed made an unprecedented offer: surrender now. Everyone could leave safely with their possessions. Constantine could rule the Peloponnese as an Ottoman vassal. Emperor Constantine refused. The chronicler Francis records his answer: "The surrender of the city is beyond my power or anyone else's, because we all decided to die of our own free will." That night, in the Hagia Sophia, Orthodox and Catholic gathered for the last liturgy. Their ancient, bitter theological disputes were forgotten before the shadow of death. Thousands filled the great church, Golden mosaics of Christ Pantocrator flickered in the desperate candlelight. In the palace, Theodora's mother, known only as Lady Uprazine, made a desperate decision. She cut Theodora's hair short, rubbed her hands with kitchen soot, and dressed her in the thick wool of a kitchen servant. If the city fell, noble women would be seized as trophies. A mere servant might be overlooked in the general chaos. But even as Theodora hid, a deeper historical calculation was at work. A calculation that would transform a massacre into one of the most shocking acts of strategic statecraft in the history of conquest. May 29, 1453, before dawn, the Ottoman drums began the death march. 80,000 voices rose in a cry of Allahu Akbar so loud, the earth itself, according to the historian Dukas, seemed to tremble in reply. The waves crashed upon the walls, first the irregular troops dying in hundreds, then the disciplined Anatolian soldiers, finally, the elite janissaries, the personal guard of the Sultan. At 5 a.m. the catastrophe struck. The Genoese commander Giovanni Giustiniani was gravely wounded and panicking demanded to be taken to his ship. His Italian troops, seeing their leader abandon them, broke formation. The Ottomans pressed harder. Then the true horror. A small postern gate, the Kirka Porta, was found unlocked. An Ottoman soldier named Ulubatli Hassan surged through with 30 men, raising the crescent flag on the inner wall. The Byzantine defenders saw their nightmare realized. The enemy inside. Morale shattered. Emperor Constantine tore off his imperial regalia and charged into the fray with a sword, shouting, "The city has fallen, and I am still alive." His body was never definitively identified. By 8 a.m. the law of conquest was unleashed. The next 24 hours would be remembered as one of the most brutal sackings of the Middle Ages. Men were slaughtered in the streets. Women and children were pursued relentlessly. Historians estimate that between 30,000 and 50,000 people were enslaved that day. The Hagia Sophia became a trap. Troops smashed the bronze doors, dragging priests from the altar and separating the crowd. Beautiful women, strong young men, and children who could be indoctrinated were selected as prizes. In the great palace, Theodora, disguised as a kitchen maid, pressed herself into the darkest corner of an olive oil warehouse. Her heart hammered against the floorboards as she listened to the thud of boots, the screams, and the smashing of relics in the marble corridors where she once danced. Hours later, the systematic fury subsided into organized collection. Prisoners were driven to the ancient hippodrome, the former stadium, to be catalogued, valued, and divided. And then Sultan Mehmed II entered Constantinople. His entrance was a carefully choreographed performance. Riding a white Arabian stallion, flanked by his viziers, he went straight to the Hagia Sophia. Dismounting, he scattered a handful of soil on his turban in a gesture of Islamic humility before God, and then proclaimed that the millennia-old cathedral would become a mosque. But then, the unthinkable. Mehmed immediately ordered the looting to stop after only 1 day instead of the traditional 3. The soldiers grumbled, but they obeyed. The Sultan announced that citizens who had hidden in their homes would be unharmed. Churches would be protected. The Great Vizier presented a list of high-value captives. Among them, several members of the Palaiologos family, including a teenage girl found in the palace, betrayed by her soft hands and sophisticated speech despite her servants' rags. Princess Theodora was brought before Sultan Mehmed II in the great throne room, where her ancestors had ruled for centuries. The marble hall smelled of smoke. Bloodstains blackened the floor. Mehmed sat on a portable throne, clad in white silk and a huge turban secured with a jeweled brooch, deliberately mirroring Roman imperial regalia. Theodora was shoved forward, still dressed as a kitchen maid, paralyzed by terror. Ottoman protocol demanded she fall on her face. She stood frozen. The chronicler Kritavulos, who interviewed witnesses, records Mehmed studying her for a long moment. His translator asked her name. She whispered it. Mehmed, who spoke Greek fluently, asked directly, "You are of the line of Palaiologos?" "I am." The Ottoman commanders waited, expecting the standard practice: capture, concubinage, or execution. The Byzantines expected enslavement. Mehmed asked his final question, "Can you read and write?" Greek, Latin, and a little Arabic. And then the moment that shattered every assumption about medieval conquest. Sultan Mehmed II ordered Princess Theodora to be released, not as a slave, not as a concubine, but as a free woman under the protection of the state, granted a stipend and a residence in the Fanar district, with permission to practice Christianity openly. Mehmed's reasoning was a terrifying display of imperial foresight. He had proclaimed himself the Caesar of Rome. To be a legitimate Caesar, he needed continuity with the Byzantine past, not its absolute annihilation. Showing mercy to the imperial family was a display of Roman dignity. Protecting the Christians positioned him as the ruler of all his subjects, not only Muslims. Some historians, including Franz Babinger, suggest Mehmed may have considered marrying the princess to solidify his claim as the true successor of Constantine the Great. Whether Theodora was ever truly considered for that role, the unprecedented grace shown to her was a strategic calculation beyond simple human kindness. Theodora was not the only beneficiary of this cold mercy. Mehmed appointed a prominent Byzantine scholar, Gennadius Scholarius, as the new Orthodox Patriarch, granting him secular power over all Orthodox Christians in the empire. A Muslim sultan was empowering a Christian religious leader with civil authority. The message was devastatingly clear. This was not the end of Byzantium but its transformation. Theodora lived under Ottoman protection for 3 years, a ghost of a princess watching her city transform. Mosques rose next to churches. Greek scholars entered Ottoman service. In 1456, she was allowed to leave for the Peloponnese, where the last Byzantine remnants shimmered. Reports suggest she lived out her years in quiet freedom. Her story was suppressed by both sides. Western European chroniclers preferred the narrative of Ottoman cruelty. Mercy complicated their pleas for a new crusade. Ottoman historians focused on Mehmed's military genius. His policies protecting Christians suggested an uncomfortable complexity to their religious conquest. The truth, as revealed in Ottoman palace records listing Greeks granted immunity from enslavement and even given stipends, tells a different story. Mehmed needed administrators who understood Byzantine systems. He was a Renaissance prince who valued Greek science. Most chillingly, protecting Theodora and the Palaiologos family prevented Western Europe from rallying any surviving royal figure into a new crusade. The conqueror who destroyed the Byzantine Empire also kept its people more effectively than the internal disputes of his Byzantine predecessors. This tragedy and triumph teaches us that the monsters and heroes of history rarely fit our categories. The conqueror who allowed for a day of brutality could also show the strategic grace that saved thousands. The 15-year-old princess who lost everything survived thanks to adaptation and the chilling calculation of a ruler who needed her alive to legitimize his stolen crown. The Fall of Constantinople reveals this haunting pattern. Empires do not end cleanly. The victors need their victims more than they admit, and survival often comes not from sympathy, but from the powerful's need for legitimization. Imagine Princess Theodora that day in the smoke-filled throne room, the terror turning to confusion, the confusion turning to disbelief, and the ultimate, cold realization that she would live because her conqueror needed her name. Imagine Mehmed balancing a military tradition that demanded blood with an imperial ambition that demanded Rome itself. The city that stood for 1,100 years fell in a morning. The teenage princess who should have died was released by her conqueror, and the sultan who led 80,000 men became the unexpected protector of the people he had vanquished. Mercy and massacre walked hand in hand through the burning streets of Constantinople, revealing that the darkest secrets of history are often hidden in the simplest of documented facts.